In this video, I will be performing the suite in F minor by Jean-Nicolas Geoffroy. The suite has 8 movements: Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, Gavotte, Menuet, Rondeau, Gigue, and Chaconne. In some respects, this video has been several years in the making. Let me explain what I mean by that. The first thing to mention is that in the manuscript containing the works of Geoffroy, this is one of the suites that appear in more than one tonality. So this suite exists in both an F minor and a G minor version. The Chaconne in the G minor version is one of the very first pieces by Geoffroy that I played and recorded several years ago. It is a piece that, when I first encountered it, I found it both utterly fascinating and quite puzzling in terms of interpretation. I decided to revisit the Chaconne after a number of years and made a new recording that I felt was more convincing in dealing with some of its more puzzling features. In that video, I also argued that it was an example of Geoffroy taking advantage of the unique characteristics of quarter comma mean tone for expressive purposes. And I will put a link to that video in the video description. Since I didn't have access to either the original manuscript or the modern edition of Geoffroy's works, I only had half of the movements of the G minor version of the suite, and so didn't record any of the others. Then I managed to get a hold of 4 of the movements of the F minor version, which made me realize there were some differences between the 2 versions, but also made me question the suitability of quarter comma mean tone for the F minor version. At that time, I made 2 videos devoted to the 4 movements of the F minor version I had the scores to: the Allemande, the Courante, the Sarabande, and the Gigue. And I will put a link to those videos in the video description, since I discuss those 4 movements in detail and also talk about some of the differences between the F minor and the G minor version. Now, thanks to the generosity of a friend, I'm very happy to finally have the modern edition of Geoffroy's works, and I can complete this project. Since I discussed 4 of the movements in previous videos, I would like to concentrate here on the Chaconne because it is remarkable for several reasons, and every time I revisit it, I discover new details. Formally, the Chaconne follows the fairly standard Rondeau form, characteristic of many French chaconnes. There is an opening refrain alternating with contrasting sections, or couplets. After the last couplet, the refrain returns once more and concludes the piece. In this particular chaconne, there are 4 couplets. Let's first look at the refrain, which sounds like this. If we examine its surface elements, we have a fairly typical structure consisting of 2 phrases, each comprising 4 measures, and whose harmonic trajectory has led theorists to label these phrases as antecedent and consequent. What this means is that the first phrase cadences in the dominant, while the second phrase uses musical material from the first phrase, but reworks it so that it cadences in the tonic. So in other words, we start like this. So we have cadence here in C major, which is the dominant, and then what's going to happen next is, so we start with the same material that the first section started, and it's a little reworked. So now it has cadenced back to F minor. But while the phrase structure is fairly normal, the harmony and melodic contour make this refrain distinctive and beautiful. The chord progression in itself is fairly standard. In other words, we start with a tonic chord, we go to the fourth chord, subdominant, then to the 2 chord, and then the dominant. But what is happening here is arguably only one chord in this progression is a simple triad. The opening tonic chord is actually a 7th chord. So we start, and then with the exception of the 4 chord, which is a simple triad, both the 2 chord and the dominant chord are 9th chords. So we have this one for the 2 chord and this one for the dominant. And as we will see, the interval that is formed between the root of the 9th chord and the top note, which is a minor 9th, or if we take away the octave displacement, a minor 2nd or a semitone, is going to permeate the texture of several passages in the piece. And if you have watched my previous videos about Geoffroy, you will be aware that 9th chords appear frequently in his music. By the way, what I meant about this minor 9th, or if I take away the octave displacement, a minor 2nd, is this. If we take, for instance, the 2 chord, the interval between the root, in other words, the bottom note, and the top note, is this minor 9th. And if I move down this A flat, if I take the octave displacement away, it's just a minor 2nd. So that's what I meant. But another feature that I think makes this refrain so expressively beautiful is what happens in measures 5 and 6. In the first phrase, the melodic contour is mostly stepwise. So we have, after this, and then if we continue to, it's mostly stepwise. However, when this material returns in the second phrase, the last note in measure 5 is transformed into an upward leap, which is followed by a downward leap. So here we have this. Here's the upward leap, followed by this downward leap. So we make this phrase more expressive at that moment. And what happens immediately afterwards in the left hand further intensifies the expression of that moment, because the interval of the minor 9th that up to now had been part of the harmonic identity of this refrain now also becomes part of the melodic contour of the left hand. Because what is going to happen right after that moment that I played is this. Let me go back a little bit. So we have the minor 9th right there. So we have the leaps here that we didn't have before, and then suddenly we have the maximum and arguably a very dissonant leap in the melodic contour of the left hand. Let me show you a few more examples where this minor 9th or semitone interval occurs. In the first 4 measures of the first couplet, the left hand plays a descending tetrachord that is fully chromatic. So this is what the first four measures of the first couplet sound like. So the left hand is playing a tetrachord, but instead of just going down diatonically, we go down chromatically. In three of these measures, there are simultaneous or near simultaneous occurrences of a minor ninth or a semitone. So right here. So we have three occurrences of this interval, and in the last two measures of this first couplet, the left hand duplicates the minor ninth interval we encountered in measure 6 in the refrain. In the penultimate measure, it spans the exact same notes between G and A flat, while in the last measure it is transposed to C and D flat. So before, if you remember, we had this. So in the penultimate measure of the first couplet, we have this. So, and then the last measure, another minor ninth. There are several more examples throughout the piece, but I simply wanted to identify a few of them. And it is noteworthy that what makes these dissonant intervals stand out even more is the fact that Geoffroy seems to deliberately utilize them in more obvious places within a measure, like, for example, on the beat rather than within the beat. Perhaps the most remarkable or strangest moment in this chaconne occurs in the last part of the fourth couplet. The best way to describe it is that as we're going along, the flow of musical ideas seem to gradually come to a halt, and the right hand starts repeating a half-step oscillation over and over, while the left hand eventually also settles in a quasi-whole step oscillation. Let me play you this passage right now, but please keep in mind that you're listening to it out of context, without reference to what has happened before or what will follow it, which is the return of the opening refrain, so its expressive impact will not be particularly evident. I want to focus on the two measures where both hands seem to be engaged in a type of oscillation, and I want to compare the two versions, that is, the F minor and the G minor, because I think this raises the issue of the choice of temperament, and perhaps more specifically, how temperament can serve an expressive purpose. Let's look at the score of that passage in both versions. Let's first address the key signatures, or more precisely, the types of key signatures you see. In the G minor version, one flat is missing, so the key signature consists of only B flat rather than B flat and E flat. But as I have mentioned in previous videos, having one flat less than what we expect nowadays is fairly normal in 17th century music. The F minor version, however, is a little more unusual. Normally, we expect 4 flats: B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. But here there are only 2, B flat and A flat. From our modern perspective, it is as if Geoffroy is referencing the melodic F minor scale. And yes, reading the score with this type of key signature does require a little getting used to. Now let's look at the left hand. You will notice that in both versions, what in reality is a whole tone or a major second is notated in a way that effectively makes it a diminished third. In some respects, this peculiarity also makes it a little more awkward to read, and one wonders why Geoffroy did not choose a more conventional way of notating it. When I made the video discussing the G minor version of the Chaconne, I argued that Geoffroy had notated these 2 particular notes as they would appear in quarter comma mean tone temperament. Since there are no enharmonics in mean tone, the 2 accidental keys between C and E, these 2, specifically correspond to the notes C sharp and E flat, and not their enharmonic equivalents. The result of playing this passage using quarter comma mean tone is that what may appear and sound as a static, uninteresting moment in a milder temperament, or especially equal temperament, becomes a moment charged with expressive tension because the interval between those 2 notes is not really a whole step, but rather precisely what Geoffroy has notated, a diminished third. So I have tuned the upper manual of the harpsichord to quarter comma mean tone so that you can hear what I mean. This is the left hand on its own. And when I combine it with the right hand, it sounds like this. In other words, this is a very unstable interval, and its repetition in this passage accentuates and prolongs the instability. So you can see that what he has done here is to create a certain expressive effect that really relies, I think at least, on using quarter comma mean tone temperament. Now, what is going to complicate matters a little bit is that at the time I made the video about the Chaconne in the G minor version, I had not seen the F minor version, and I still didn't have access to it when I recorded 4 movements from the F minor suite. But when I first looked at those 4 movements in F minor, I knew that standard quarter comma mean tone was not appropriate since both A flat and D flat are unavailable. Therefore, my decision back then was to use my favorite Rameau temperament because I felt it gave the music a certain mournful quality that was somehow equivalent to the effect that mean tone gave to the G minor version. And since I wanted to be consistent when recording the complete F minor version, I pretty much had to record the remaining movements using the same temperament. Personally, I think it works really well, and when I played that passage the first time, you probably noticed that this also doesn't sound particularly stable. So going back now to the F minor version, there's still a certain spiciness to this. Nevertheless, a couple of questions to which I do not have a definitive answer remain. Why did Geoffroy notate this interval in the F minor version also as a diminished third? Is it simply because D flat is part of the key signature of F minor even though he doesn't include it in his version of the key signature? Was he after a sort of transposed quarter comma mean tone with a wolf placed elsewhere? Or perhaps a modified mean tone that dispenses with the wolf and makes F minor playable? Did he want the same expressive effect in both versions of the piece? Or was he interested in exploring alternative expressive colors? What I found out when I played it using the Rameau Temperament, as you just heard a minute ago, was that the unresolved tension in that passage, while perhaps not as pronounced, is still there and creates an effect that I feel enhances the expressive content of the music. Finally, a few remarks regarding the recording and the accompanying score. As I have mentioned before, 4 of the movements, the Allemande, the Courante, the Sarabande, and the Gigue, were recorded in 2018. The remaining 4 movements are all new recordings. I've made sure the sound remains consistent between the old and the new recordings, and the score that accompanies the performance is the modern edition, which was edited by Mary Tilton. You will notice several discrepancies between the score and what I actually play, because my performance incorporates alternate readings from the G minor version. If I were to make a general remark regarding the differences between the 2 versions, it would be that some passages in the G minor version are a little more worked out in terms of extra details and more activity in the inner voices. The G minor version also contains more ornaments. The petite reprise in the Sarabande, that is, the repetition of the last few measures of the second section for a 3rd time, is my own idea and does not appear in either version. The last couplet of the Chaconne has an extra measure in the G minor version, which I include in my performance. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the performance.